The Galactic Unified Forces prided themselves on many things, but having reasonable standards for military recruitment wasn't one of them. The sprawling Multi-Kais, confederation that dominated 3 spiral arms of the Milky Way, had achieved what political scientists called functional governance and what everyone else called a bureaucratic nightmare with guns. Oh, they had technology that would make Earth's brightest minds weep with envy, ships that bent space-time like it was a cheap plastic, spoon weapons that could atomize moons, and medical tech that made death more of a lifestyle choice than an inevitability. But despite all their advancements, the Guff had never quite figured out how to make a proper cup of coffee or design forms. With fewer than 17 signature lines, it was into this illustrious organization that recruit R7293, formerly known as Tess Blackwood off Tacoma, Washington, found herself unceremoniously deposited after Earth's hasty and somewhat embarrassing induction into galactic society. And here we have another soft-skinned primate from that backwater mudball, announced Commander Var, his 12 eyes blinking in sequential disinterest as he examined the new batch of recruits. The Nexilid officer's carapace gleamed under the harsh lights of the processing center. Tell me, Earth creature, do you think you can handle training on Terminus 9? Most species require several generations of genetic enhancement before they're cleared for DeathWorlds. Correction, R7293, stood at rigid attention, trying not to stare at the commander's mandibles, which were clicking in what she hoped was amusement, rather than hunger. Yes, sir, Earth has multiple biomes classified as extreme by galactic standards. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. We have this elicited a ripple of what might have been laughter from the assembled alien recruits. It sounded like a combination of dial-up internet connecting and someone strangling a bagpipe bears, repeated the commander, the universal translator somehow conveying his withering contempt. How delightful! I'm sure the scorch beasts of Terminus 9 will be thoroughly intimidated by your experience with these bears. The transport ship to Terminus 9 was every bit as comfortable as one might expect from a military vessel designed by beings with exoskeletons and no concept of lumbar support. Tess found herself wedged between a Valerian with 6 arms, all of which seemed to require extraordinary personal space, and a gelatinous Murap that kept accidentally absorbing parts of her uniform when it dozed off. First human in your unit, huh? The question came from across the narrow aisle where a reptilian Draxian was cleaning its scales with a sonic pick. Bet you won't last a cycle. Tess smiled thinly. That a professional assessment or just casual xenophobia? The Draxian's forked tongue flicked out in what might have been their species' equivalent of a chuckle. Neither. Its statistics, Terminus 9 has a 97% washout rate for species without natural armor or poison glands. You have it. Paused, eyes narrowing. Skin that tears when you touch a thorn plant. We also have something called stubborn spite. Tess replied. It's kept our species alive through Ice Age's plagues and reality television. The Draxian tilted its head. What is tele-attention? All recruits interrupted the ship's AI with the enthusiasm of a tax auditor announcing an extended review. We're beginning our descent to Terminus 9 training facility. Please ensure all appendages are securely attached to your torsos and all psychic barriers are at minimum strength. The atmospheric entry may cause mild discomfort, severe discomfort, or spontaneous molecular realignment in susceptible species. Tess gripped her harness. The Moy lap beside her rippled anxiously and turned a concerning shade of chartreuse. Welcome to the next 3 years of your military career. The AI continued its tone, suggesting it had lost a bet to end up with this assignment. Try not to become part of the local food chain. Terminus 9 wasn't just a death world. It was the gold standard by which other death worlds measured their inadequacy. The training facility had been built in the least lethal region of the planet, which was like saying it was the coolest spot on the surface of the sun. The air smelled of sulfur and something reminiscent of overripe bananas. The vegetation came in exactly 2 varieties, carnivorous and extremely carnivorous. Even the rocks seemed vaguely predatory, with crystalline formations that absorbed light in ways that gave Tess migraines if she looked at them too long. This is the main compound. Droned Lieutenant Pixel, a gaseous being contained in a humanoid exosuit. You will eat here, train here, and possibly die here, though we do request you make it to the designated mortality processing centers if you feel death is imminent. Paperwork. You understand the compound was a sprawling collection of reinforced structures that looked like someone had asked a paranoid hermit crab to design a military base. Every building was domed, shielded, and equipped with what appeared to be enough weaponry to overthrow a small government. Your training begins at first light. Pjol continued its exosuit, releasing small puffs of what might have been boredom. The local DAL cycle is 32 standard hours, so I suggest you all get some rest now. Tomorrow's exercise will take you into the razor leaf forest for basic survival training. A collective groan rose from the non-human recruits. What's the razor leaf forest? Tess whispered to the Draxian, who had somehow become her default information source despite their mutual antipathy. It's where they separate the viable recruits. From the future ration packs, it replied, scales paling slightly. The trees secrete a neurotoxin that causes hallucinations. The ground is home to burrowing parasites that lay eggs in your brainstem. And the whole area is the primary hunting ground for the planet's apex predator, which is the Draxian's pupils, contracted to pinpoint the Crixian death shadow, a predator so efficient that it evolved sentience just to better enjoy the terror of its prey. It leaned closer. They say it can smell fear from 50 kilometers away, and has digestive acid strong enough to dissolve starship hull plating. Tess blinked. So, it's basically a space honey badger. I don't know what that is, but if it haunts the nightmares of your species, then, yes, the first day of training dawned with the peculiar purple-orange light that was Terminus 9's signature atmospheric effect. Tess had slept poorly, partly due to the standard-issue bunk that seemed designed for beings with very different spinal configurations, and partly because her quarters kept sampling her DNA every 15 minutes for security purposes. The training squad assembled at the edge of the razor leaf forest, a grotesque panorama of vegetation that looked like the unholy offspring of a cactus and a meat grinder. The trees, if you could call them, that were tall, spindly things with leaves like serrated knives that swayed menacingly, despite the lack of wind. Drill instructor Gorvin, a hulking, four-armed bracken with skin like volcanic rock, paced before them. Today's exercise is simple. He growled, his voice like tectonic plates arm wrestling. You will enter the forest in teams of 3. You will retrieve a beacon from the central clearing. You will return with all your original body parts. Any questions? A tentacled Dequillian raised an appendage. Sir, what about the death shadows? Gaven's face split into what might generously be called a smile. It looked more like a geological fault line deciding to rethink its life choices. Excellent question. If you encounter a death shadow, your options are as follows. Run, hide, or die with enough dignity that we don't as your final moments as a training video on what not to do. The teams were assigned seemingly at random, though. Tess suspected the algorithm was maximum biological incompatibility. She found herself paired with the Draxian, whose name she learned was Kazitz, pronounced with a clicking sound. She couldn't replicate without dislocating her jaw, and a crystalline being called Shimmer, who communicated through light pulses and seemed perpetually disappointed in organic life forms. Stay close, Kazet advised as they approached the forest edge. The humans should walk between us. You're the most vulnerable. Tess adjusted her standard issue pulse rifle, which had been designed for beings with longer arms and possibly extra joints I can handle. Myself, Shimmer emitted a series of rapid flashes that the translator rendered as statistically improbable. They entered the forest in tense silence. The vegetation seemed to respond to their presence, leaves turning toward them like curious yet murderous spectators. The ground beneath their feet was spongy and occasionally pulsated in a way that made Tess deeply regret her breakfast. We're being watched, Kazant whispered after they'd been walking for about 20 minutes. Its tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Something big. It's circling us. Jimmer's crystalline body dimmed anxiously. Death shadow proximity retreat suggested, we need that beacon. Tess reminded them, trying to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of her neck. Earth's evolutionary history had hardwired humans with a pretty effective something is hunting you alert system, and hers was currently screaming at full volume. A rustle in the underbrush made all 3 of them freeze. Something was moving parallel to their path. Something large enough to displace the razor-sharp vegetation without seeming to take damage from it. There, Kisden hissed, pointing with a clawed hand. Tess turned just in time to see a patch of darkness detach itself from the shadows beneath a gnarled tree thing. Her first impression was of smooth, light-absorbing scales, covering a body roughly the size of Attiger, but shaped more like a cross between a panther and a Komodo dragon. Its head was oddly triangular with no visible eyes but a series of sensory pits that pulsed with an eerie blue glow. 6 limbs moved with liquid grace, and what appeared to be retractable quills ran along its spine. "Don't move," Cosette's voice was barely audible. The death shadow turned toward them with predatory precision, nostrils flaring as it sampled the air. Its head swung from shimmer to kitted, and then to test for a long heart-topping moment it fixated on the human. Then it did something unexpected. It sat down. It did what Commander Zigvar's 12 eyes blinked in asynchronous disbelief. "It sat, sir," Tess repeated, standing at attention in the debriefing room alongside her shell-shocked teammates. Then it followed us to the beacon and back to the compound perimeter. "It's still out there, actually." The base's chief xenobiologist, Dr. Quinn, a spindly being with too many degrees and not enough patience, peered at Tess through magnifying lenses. "Impossible Crixian death shadows are apex ambush predators with documented kills from every species stationed on this planet. They do not sight or follow, unless it's part of a hunting strategy." "With respect," Doctor interjected. "This one did. It even prevented the human from stepping into a neurotoxin patch." The room erupted in multilingual exclamations of disbelief. Commander Zigvar raised several limbs. "For silence, show me," he ordered. The security footage from the forest was grainy but clear enough to show the death shadow's bizarre behavior. After its initial encounter with the team, it had indeed followed them, maintaining a distance of about 20 meters at one point when Tess had nearly stepped into a cluster of seemingly innocuous purple fungi. The creature had darted forward with blinding speed, not to attack, but to block her path with its body. "Fascinating," Dr. Quinn muttered, mandibles twitching in scientific excitement. "It's almost as if, but no, that would be ridiculous. What would Commander Zigvar demanded? Well, some predatory species have been known to adopt potential prey animals that trigger parental instincts instead of predatory ones. But that would require significant biochemical signaling compatibility, which is virtually impossible between species from different evolutionary trees, let alone different planets." Tess shifted uncomfortably. "Could we have something in common? Humans evolved alongside predators on Earth." Dr. Quinn's appendages fluttered dismissively. The chances of convergent biochemistry reaching a level where a Terminus 9 apex predator would recognize human pheromones as anything significant. Astronomical Commander Zigvar steepled his primary manipulators. "And yet here where I want further observation. The human will continue training with enhanced monitoring. If this death shadow continues its unusual behavior, we may have stumbled upon something militarily significant." For the next 2 weeks, Tess found herself the reluctant star of what the Draxian recruits had dubbed the deadliest playdate in the galaxy. Every time she ventured outside the compound, her death shadow, now unofficially named Spot despite having no spots whatsoever, would materialize from the surrounding landscape to trail her like an overprotective shadow. Dr. the Quinn had taken to following Tess as well, albeit with less predatory grace and more obsessive scanning equipment. The xenobiologist was determined to crack the mystery of the death shadow's behavior, a quest that led to tests being poked, prodded, and sampled in ways that made standard military physicals seem like spa treatments. "Perhaps it's your sweat composition," Dr. Quinn hypothesized one evening, examining avial of Tess's perspiration with unsettling enthusiasm. "Humans produce a unique cocktail of stress hormones and pheromones. Fascinating how inefficient your cooling system is." "Thank you," Tess replied, trying to focus on field stripping her pulse rifle rather than on the fact that an alien scientist was sniffing her sweat with specialized sensory organs. "I've requisitioned permission to capture the specimen for controlled study." Dr. Quinn continued, "The military applications could be revolutionary if we can synthesize whatever signal you're producing." Tess frowned. You want to capture Spot? That seems dangerous. Oh, tremendously so. The mortality rate for Death Shadow containment attempts is 98%, but science demands sacrifice. Preferably not mine. Tess muttered. The capture attempt was scheduled for the following week, but fate, or more accurately, a band of interstellar pirates with poor timing intervened first. The attack came during third shift, when most of the base was in its sleep cycle. A small fleet of unmarked ships dropped out of hyperspace in Terminus 9's orbit and deployed landing craft before the planetary defense grid could fully activate. Tess was jolted awake by the base's alarm, a sound specifically engineered to be universally unpleasant to all known sentient species. She was reaching for a uniform when the first explosion rocked the barracks. L personnel battle stations. Commander Zeke Var's voice blared over the comms. We are under attack by unknown hostiles. Defense Protocol Gamma 6 is now in effect. Gamma 6. Tess, recalled from her orientation, was military speak for grab whatever weapon you can and try not to die immediately. She managed to pull on her boots and grab. Her sidearm before the barracks door blew inward in a shower of superheated metal. Through the smoke stepped three figures in environmental suits far too advanced for standard pirates. Their weapons were similarly high-end military-grade disruptors that could reduce organic matter to its component atoms in seconds. This is air-restricted military installation, Tess announced with all the authority she could muster while standing in her underwear and one boot. Surrender your weapons immediately. The lead intruder's helmet tilted in what might have been amusement. When he spoke, his voice came through, a synthesizer that gave it an artificial menacing quality. We're not here for a fight, we're here for research data specifically. Dr. Quen's work on the Death Shadow behavioral anomaly. Tess blinked. Corporate espionage. Then the Guff had dozens of private military contractors constantly trying to steal research for weapons development. That information is classified, hence the explosions. The intruder replied dryly. Now you can tell us where to find the xenobiology lab, or we can start removing limbs until someone else decides to be helpful. Before Tess could respond, the barracks wall to her right simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, the next, it had been replaced by a gaping hole through which poured the purple-orange light of Terminus 9's dawn, and the sleek, deadly form of a very agitated Death Shadow Spot moved with the liquid grace of a nightmare given physical form. One moment it was at the threshold. The next it had crossed the room and taken down two of the intruders with surgical precision, not killing them. Tess noted with surprise, but disabling them with targeted strikes to their limbs and weapons. The third intruder managed to bring his disruptor to bear, but Spot was already in motion again, a living shadow that seemed to bend the light around it. The Death Shadow's quills extended with a sound like knives being unsheathed, and it launched itself at the attacker. What followed was less a fight and more a demonstration of evolutionary perfection. Spot moved with impossible speed, avoiding the disruptor beam, while systematically dismantling both the weapon and the intruder's environmental suit. Within seconds, the would-be corporate spy was pinned beneath 600 lbf apex predator, his suit in tatters, and his expression, visible now through his shattered helmet, one of absolute terror. Spot turned to look at Tess, its sensory pits pulsing with that eerie blue glow. Then, in a gesture that would later be analyzed by xenobiologists across the galaxy, it nudged the disruptor toward her with one clawed limb. Good boy, Tess said tentatively. The Death Shadow made a sound somewhere between a purr and a garbage disposal processing silverware. By the time the rest of the base security had mobilized, Spot had already neutralized 4 more intruders and guided, or more, accurately herded Tess to the command center, where a visibly shaken Commander Zivar was coordinating the defense recruit R7293. The commander acknowledged his normally imperious tone, somewhat subdued by the presence of the Death Shadow lounging casually at Tess's side. I see you've brought reinforcements. Spot helped fight off the attackers targeting the xenobiology data, Tess explained, trying to maintain military formality while absently patting the head of a creature that could disembowel everyone in the room faster than they could blink. Dr. Quen burst into the command center, tentacles waving in scientific ecstasy. Extraordinary. The symbiotic bonding has progressed to active protection. This changes everything we know about interspecies compatibility. The attack was repelled within hours, largely due to Spot's unexpected assistance. The Death Shadow had not only protected Tess, but had somehow communicated with others of its kind, resulting in a terrifying scenario for the remaining intruders being hunted through Terminus 9's lethal landscape by creatures that had evolved to kill on this death world. In the aftermath, as the GUF military intelligence unit interrogated the captured attackers, Tess found herself in an uncomfortable meeting with high-ranking officials who had arrived via emergency transport as soon as news of the incident had spread. "Let me get this straight," said Admiral Yorick's being composed primarily of sentient gas contained within an ornate mechanical exoskeleton. "A human recruit has somehow formed a bond with the deadliest predator on one of our most lethal training worlds. And this predator not only protects her, but can apparently communicate with others of its species to coordinate defensive actions." "That is correct," Admiral Commander Zegvar confirmed, his posture rigid with military precision despite the lingering shock evident in his eye movements, and the attackers were specifically targeting data on this phenomenon. "Yes, sir. They were working for the Aurelian Corporation. According to preliminary interrogation, they believed the research could lead to biotechnological breakthroughs in controlling apex predators for military applications." The Admiral's containment suit shifted colors, and what Tess had learned was an expression of thoughtful concern. "What's your assessment of the situation?" Dr. Quinn, the xenobiologist, practically vibrated with excitement. "After extensive analysis, I believe I've identified the mechanism. Human stress hormones and certain pheromones bear a remarkable chemical similarity to the parental recognition markers of juvenile death shadows. In essence, this death shadow perceives the human as well as a very strange, very helpless baby." Death shadow. There was a moment of stunned silence, broken only by the soft rumbling purr of Spot, who had refused to leave Tess's side and was currently curled around her chair like 600 lbu of lethal security blanket. "A baby," repeated Admiral Yorick's flatly. "It thinks Rec Route R7293 is a baby, essentially." "Yes," Dr. Quinn confirmed, "the biochemical signals are similar enough to trigger protective instincts rather than predatory ones. It's an astronomical coincidence of convergent evolution." Tess cleared her throat. "With respect, sir, I think there might be more to it than that. Spot seems intelligent, the way it handed me weapons during the attack, the way it coordinated with others of its kind. I think it recognizes me as an ally, not just as offspring." Admiral UX turned his attention to Tessar. "You suggesting these creatures possess higher intelligence than we've documented? I'm suggesting that maybe our documentation isn't complete. Sir, humans evolved alongside predators too. We've spent millions of years reading their body language, understanding their behaviors. Maybe that gives us an advantage in communicating with them that other species don't have." The Admiral was silent for a long moment. "Commander Zakava, I want a new training program established immediately. Test for compatibility between human recruits and Terminus 9 indigenous life. If this isn't a one-off phenomenon, we could be looking at a significant tactical advantage." "Yes, Admiral, and recruit R7293. The Admiral's containment suit shifted to a color Tess hadn't seen before. "Congratulations. You've just become the prototype for an entirely new kind of specialist in the Galactic Unified Forces. The xenobiologist will want to study you and your companion extensively." Tess glanced down at Spot, who looked back at her with sensory pits glowing contentedly. "What exactly would my title be, sir?" The Admiral's vocode remitted what might have been a chuckle. "How does Death Shadow Handler sound 6 months later?" Tess stood at the edge of the razor-leaf forest, watching a new batch of human recruits cautiously approach a group of juvenile death shadows. Beside her, Spot had grown even larger, its quills now sporting decorative guff insignia that it somehow hadn't shredded or eaten yet. "Remember," she called out to the nervous recruits, "they can literally smell your fear, so try to project confidence without aggression. Think of them as very large, very deadly cats with abandonment issues and the ability to dissolve your bones. Is she serious?" One recruit whispered to another. "Absolutely," replied Commander Zukvar, who had developed, if not a fondness for humans, then at least a grudging respect for their bizarre talents. "Handler R7293 is our foremost expert on Death Shadow integration. Thanks to her work, we've established successful bonds with 17 of the creatures and expanded the program. to 3 other death worlds with similar apex predators. Tess smiled as she watched one of the death shadows cautiously approach a female recruit who displayed the biochemical markers that Dr. Quinn had identified as compatible. The creatures were still lethal, still perfectly evolved killing machines. But they were also, it turned out, capable of forming complex social bonds and remarkably eager to adopt strange soft aliens who smelled vaguely like their offspring. "You know what the funniest part is?" she said to no one in particular as Spot leaned against her leg with bone-crushing affection. The Galactic Council spent centuries trying to find species worthy of joining their military elite based on strength technology and natural defenses. And it turns out humans qualified because we smell like baby monsters and are too stubborn to know when we should be terrified across the galaxy. Dozens of advanced civilizations had mastered faster than light travel conquered to seas and built empires spanning multiple star systems. Yet somehow they'd all been outdone by naked apes from a backwater planet who had the evolutionary audacity to smell like the offspring of apex predators that made even hardened space marines check under their bunks at night, as if reading her thoughts. Spot made that garbage disposal eating silverware sound that Tess had come to interpret as laughter. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all, and the joke was on anyone who thought humans were the helpless creatures in this relationship. Because when it came down to it, the question wasn't which species was the apex predator, it was which apex had managed to convince the other one to follow it home and fight its battles. And in that particular evolutionary arms race, humanity was winning by a landslide. 1 year after the initial discovery, Tess found herself addressing the Galactic Security Council, an honor typically reserved for high-ranking officers and beings with more appendages than she could count on both hands. "You mean, to tell us draw High Council of Rex, a being composed of what appeared to be animated crystal and concentrated disdain that we should reorganize our entire military structure to accommodate humans and their pets?" Spot, who was sprawled beside Tess's podium like an oversized throw rug made of nightmares, lifted its head at the word pet and emitted a low rumbling sound that sent several council aides scurrying for the exits. "With respect, Counselor," Tess replied, keeping her tone level. "The Death Shadow Integration Program has increased mission success rates by 73% in high-risk environments. They're not pets. They're partners. Admiral Yorix now." Tess's staunchest ally in the military hierarchy activated his holographic display. The statistics speak for themselves. Human Death Shadow teams have outperformed conventional units in every metric. And beyond Terminus 9, we've discovered compatible apex predators on 6 other death worlds. The council chamber buzzed with multilingual murmurs. A Hevlani representative raised a tentacle. But the cost of transporting humans across the galaxy just to bond with local predators is minuscule compared to the cost of the advanced weaponry these predators render unnecessary. Tess interjected. "One Death Shadow can replace an entire platoon of battle mechs at a fraction of the resource cost." High Council of Rex's crystalline structure vibrated in what might have been irritation. "The philosophical implications are troubling. For millennia we've defined sentient species worth by their technological achievements, their cultural complexity. Humans were only accepted into the Galactic Confederation because of your rudimentary space travel capabilities. And now you're suggesting your most valuable trait is," he struggled for the word, smelling appealing to monsters. The chamber fell silent. Even Spot seemed to be waiting for Tessa's response. She smiled, a gesture that humans knew could signal either friendship or the prelude to violence, a duality that had served her species well. "With respect, Counselor, I think you've misunderstood something fundamental about humans. Our greatest evolutionary advantage isn't our technology, it's our ability to form connections with other species." She rested one hand on Spot's massive head. "On Earth we domesticated wolves into dogs, turning fierce predators into companions. We formed bonds with cats, horses, birds, even bacteria in our guts. Our entire evolutionary history is the story of a species that survives not by being the strongest, but by being the most adaptable and the most willing to cooperate." Admiral Urix's containment suit shifted to a color that suggested approval. "The Handler program is merely the logical extension of what humans have always done. They find the dominant species in any ecosystem and form mutually beneficial relationships with them." High Council of Rex's crystals refracted light in a pattern indicating deep thought. I've lived for 7 centuries. And in all that time, I never considered that forming bonds with lesser creatures could be an evolutionary advantage. T bit back. Retort about. Who exactly was the lesser creature in a room containing both death shadows and bureaucrats? The council will deliberate, Vex announced finally. But I believe we may need to reassess our understanding of humanity's place in the galactic order. As they left the chamber, Admiral Urich drifted alongside Tess' impressive performance. You've come a long way from recruit R7293. Tess glanced down at Spot, who was causing a minor panic among the council security forces simply by existing in their vicinity. We both have, you know. The Admiral's Vakota conveyed what might have been amusement. There's an old saying in military intelligence: never underestimate a species that can make friends with its food chain. Tess laughed. On Earth, we just call it having. A dog behind them, Spot, made that garbage disposal eating silverware sound again. Some things, it seemed, transcended galactic boundaries. The bond between a human and their very large, very deadly, but ultimately loyal companion was apparently one of them, and if the rest of the galaxy had a problem with that, well, they were welcome to take it up with the Death Shadows.